Hi again then guys, and welcome back to the world of Project Cars 2 yet again, to an iconic car. We've looked at a couple of really cool semi-obscure cars, the Lotus Turbine and the TWR Jaguar, now an icon. Of course an icon for a number of reasons, not the least of which for many of us here on the channel is racing games. Many of us grew up with this car in Gran Turismo or Forza, whatever particular game you had to play, and of course Gran Turismo is probably where this car really sank its claws into being an overwhelmingly capable machine, up there with the Nissan R390 in that game, especially the earlier ones, like GT3 and 4. In the later games, of course, you started to see more LMPs and even Group C cars added, and that's much the same for a lot of other games as well. The Toyota is a very capable car. In fact, in a particular form, it almost won Le Mans, and of course famously did not win. It was leading the race but had a tyre blowout. I wish the car had won, to be honest. I would have been much happier if this car had been Toyota's victory rather than in more recent years. To me it would have been a far cooler car to win, especially a matter of years after Mazda had done so with the iconic 787B. The fascinating thing about the TS020, which we'll probably call what most people refer to it as in this video, the GT1, is that there are two distinctly different versions of this car within the game, and there are not many racing games that feature more than one. Gran Turismo 2 is one of the other very rare occasions where there are multiple versions. We have the 1998 car with a number of liveries and the 1999 car, and even the category in which the car is classified is different between the two cars. The performance is wildly different, but the crazy thing is they both have the exact same power. Now both cars have 600 horsepower on the dot. This one, the 1998 car, is technically speaking the inferior of the two when it comes to performance. It's heavier, has slower acceleration, and a significantly lower top speed. So let's compare the specs for a moment, and of course I will be talking about the other car eventually. First of all though, this one is a GT1 class car, as you'd expect, so why would the other one be any different? Well, the 1999 car ran as an LMP 900, not a GT1. Pretty big difference there, and of course the kind of rivalries you're going to see will also change accordingly. Instead of having something like a CLK-LM, for example, against you, you'll have a BMW V12 LMR. Very different rivalry. As far as the performance difference which I mentioned, as I said, both have 600 horsepower, this car weighs 2,028 pounds, the newer version weighs 1,990. So it's not a massive difference, only 38 pounds separates them, but still, neither of them are heavy, so that 38 pounds is still a significant difference. The 0 to 60 on this one, straight out of the box with no tuning, is 3.3 seconds. The newer version is 3.2. Again, not a huge difference. It's the top speed where you see the biggest and most significant advantage on the newer car. This does 201 miles an hour stock. The later one, 218. A massive difference between the two. So how does it perform? Well, as I said, we will get to the newer one in a future episode, maybe in this game, maybe even in Project Cars 3, depending on which of them are still included. But for now, I would say that the Toyota GT1 is an interesting choice to have when you compare it to the physics of Project Cars, because usually, when you drive a GT1, you pretty much know what you're going to get, be it Gran Turismo or Forza, the two most dominant examples of games that have the car. And when I say you know what you're going to get, it's exactly this. A very good top speed, smooth handling that's surprisingly forgiving, maybe a little bit on the heavy side compared to some, especially in lower corners, but a dependable, good all-rounder, maybe with a little bit of low-end lag in the case of Gran Turismo, meaning that something like a Group C car, even some other GT1s, can get out of corners quicker than the GT1 can. It tends to be the kind of machine where when you get onto a straight, that is really when it comes into its element, because the high speed handling and that top speed and high-end acceleration is very good. The car is, as I said, very forgiving as well in most games. That's the interesting delineation between Forza and Gran Turismo and Project Cars 2 though. Because it is more wheel inclined, more of a purer sim, it has less forgiving and, you could say, more randomized physics. And you can definitely notice that in this car, because the first lap, for instance, it'll be very good. It's sharp, it's precise, it's surprisingly smooth, and again forgiving like it would be in Gran Turismo or Forza. But then as the laps progress and you begin to eat through the tyres and the temperatures get a little bit higher, and of course the car's wear begins to show, which in the case of this game, that can happen quite quickly. Even in the course of this event, for instance, I started to feel a difference in the car. It starts to become less forgiving much more rapidly, and that can sometimes catch you out. I found this car to be a little bit annoying sometimes, actually, in a way that I've never experienced it in those other games, such as Forza and GT, because those games, for their, you could argue, lack of realism, it makes them more consistent. The cars don't degrade over time, only the tyres do in the middle of a race. In this game, the entire car begins to feel different because of that wear and tear and the high-speed stresses, which is great if you're looking for realism, but it can mean that a car that you start out with being the best thing around, or so you think, can change its personality pretty rapidly. This car definitely does that, and it has this one particular steering trait, which I really don't like. And again, I was driving this without tuning the car myself, so I'm sure as with any machine, you can fettle some of its issues by doing just that, tuning it. Settings in particular rather than broad sweeping upgrades, but that is that it'll suddenly have this kind of runaway oversteer, where it feels, even on lap 2 or 3, which in the case of Lasart is like 16 to 20 miles of driving, the car will suddenly feel like you've kind of eaten up most of the rear tyres, and it will just suddenly begin to say, no, I'm just going to carry on going into this corner deeper and deeper until it almost becomes a drift and goes off the track. Now, again, with a wheel, that might totally be different. For a more experienced driver, that might be totally different, and certainly with tuning I could see it being different, but I'm just talking about out-of-the-box performance. It's a great car. It's a very strong one in a straight line as well, because even though the top speed on this one is slower than the newer GT1, it's still very good within its class. Against stuff like the cars in this race, it's still really good. As you can see, it has no trouble keeping up with them on the straights, of course with slipstream. No problem slingshotting past them, it's got the power, it's got the torque, it's a great engine, and the aerodynamics are just perfect for that kind of speed. It's almost like a Group C car, really, that's kind of a GT1, but almost skirting the rules there on the aerodynamic shape of the machine, which is one of the reasons why I love it, probably. But yeah, it's a fantastic car. It's just one that you need to keep your eye on, because for 90% of the event, it'll be fantastic. You'll be annihilating everything else on the grid, smooth, taking on corners, destroying straights, getting great lap times, and then suddenly it'll kind of just run away with itself for no apparent reason. Now, I'm sure there are certain other vehicles that will do that as well, but this one, it was very apparent to me, even in comparison to some of the other cars that I've driven in the game, so it is something that you definitely need to watch out for. Another curious thing about the GT1, as my final point, is that it reminds me once again of what I mentioned about the Aero, because it's more of a Group C kind of a looking car, almost like a long tail from the 80s, even like a Porsche 962 sort of shape. It actually feels to me almost more specialised than virtually everything else on the GT1 grid, because if you think about it, the vast majority of them felt fairly grounded. The CLK GTR, the 911 GT1, the Elise GT1, even something like the Panos, the road-going roots are clearly there. You can see that. The Toyota is not like any of those. It's a pure race car, and even as a road car, it barely looks any different. And that's one of the coolest things about it, of course, but to me that always made a difference to the way it feels as well. It feels more raw, it feels more like, almost as sacrilegious as it is to say, a purer experience than a 911 GT1 or a CLK GTR. But overall, that's it for my thoughts. Of course, you might disagree, so tell me about that down below. Do you love the car? Do you hate it? Do you prefer this version? Maybe the 99 version with the speed advantage? Either way, tell me about it down below, and of course, stick around on the channel for more Project Cars content. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.